What's up, moviegoers? Welcome to the Marchio podcast. I'm your host, Anthony. In today's episode of the Marchio podcast, I'm talking about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which was released October 11th, 1974, directed by Tobe Hooper, screenwritten by Kim Henkel and Tobe Hooper, and produced by Kim Henkel and Tobe Hooper. The first Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie was the first and most successful entry in the series. It is considered to be the first of the 1970s slasher films, and originated a great many of the cliches seen in countless later low-budget movies. Its plot concerns a family of cannibals living in rural Texas who abduct customers from their gas station. The film's notable character, Leatherface, is one of the most well-known villains in cinematic horror movie history, notable for his masks made of human skin, his blood-soaked butcher's apron, and the chainsaw that he uses. Now, although the film is marketed out as a true story, it does not depict actual real events, and is instead, along with the film, as well as Psycho, inspired by the notorious killer Ed Gein, who acted alone in his killings and did not use a chainsaw. Now, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre basically starts out the film follows a group of friends who fall victim to a family of cannibals while on their way to visit an old homestead. The film was marketed as based on true events, as I stated before, and it got a lot of attention for that. Now, the character of Leatherface and minor story details was inspired by the crimes of Ed Gein. Its plot is largely fictional, so none of these accounts actually occurred. Now, Tobe Hooper, the director, producer, and writer, produced the film for less than $140,000, $700,000 adjusted for inflation in today's money, and used a cast of relatively unknown actors drawn mainly from Central Texas, where the film was shot. The limited budget forced Hooper to film for long hours 7 days a week so that he could finish as quickly as possible to reduce equipment rental costs. Due to the film's violent content, Hooper struggled to find distribution for the movie, but it was eventually required by a distributing company, and Hooper limited the quantity of on-screen gore in hopes of securing a PG rating, but the Motion Picture Association of America rated it rated R. And also with that, the film faced several and similar difficulties internationally for its release. The Texas Chainsaw was also banned in several countries, and numerous theaters stopped showing the film in response to complaints about its violence. While it initially drew a mixed reaction from critics, it was highly profitable, grossing over $30 million at the U.S. box office, equivalent with roughly over $150 million as of 2020, and selling over 16.5 million tickets in 1974. It's gained a great popularity and reputation as one of the most influential and best horror films around, and is credited with originating several elements common in the slasher movie genre, including the use of power tools as weapons, the characterization of the killer as a large, faceless figure, and killing victims, and it led to the franchise that continued the story of Leatherface and his family in prequels, sequels, remake comic books, and video games. The runtime is 83 minutes. It had a budget of $80,000 to $140,000 and grossed $30.9 million at the box office. Now, let me just say, this movie from start to finish is one of the weirdest horror films I've ever seen. Definitely makes you cringe on certain things. And the thing I like about this movie is that the aspect of how grainy the movie looks for the time that it was made. It has that old look camcorder feel to it, which is, the plot kind of of the story. And we really don't know much what's going on with the movie until, halfway through and everything happens. And when Leatherface makes his appearance for the first time in this movie, he's just a hulking big character. The Leatherface character was played by Gunnar Hansen, who's very well known as Leatherface in the horror community. Gunnar Hansen sadly passed away in November of 2015, but he did leave his mark as Leatherface. Now listen, when you hear that power chainsaw start, revving up, and then you see Leatherface just coming at you, it's crazy, it's interesting, and it's weird. The way Tobe Hooper directed this movie was fantastic. He got shots that were really different and really interestingly weird. I didn't like some of the practical effects that were happening in the movie. It just didn't feel like it was, needed. But there's a scene where Leatherface hangs a woman off of a meat hook, and it's just brutal. The screams that are in this movie are gut-wrenching. And hearing the sounds of certain limbs and ligaments and how things are done is just so creepy. I mean, it's in the backwoods of Texas, and you never know what happens when you are alone with other people, especially a cannibalistic family like, Leatherface's family. Now, the concept for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre what happened during the 1970s when Tobe Hooper was a assistant film director at the University of Texas at Austin and was working as a documentary cameraman. He already developed some of the story involving isolation, woods, and certain elements of darkness. And he credited certain newspaper clippings. And basically he based the plot of the story off of the murderer Ed Gein, who committed crimes in the 1950s Wisconsin. Now, if you don't know who Ed Gein is, I won't go into detail, but look him up and you'll know why. Now, during the 1970s, if you didn't know, there was a lot of political landscapes happening, central influences on films, and basically the central influence about the Texas Chainsaw Massacres was the massacres and the atrocities that were happening in the Vietnam War, the lack of sentimental things and the brutality of things. And while Tobe Hooper was watching the news, they showed graphic images, and of course in the 70s and 80s, in the early 60s, you could show graphic images on TV and get away with it. And this is basically how, he got the idea of, the cannibalistic aspect of things and other factors of, what would happen if certain stories were brought in, and how can we, show certain coverages of, brains spilling all over the road, which led to, the wearing of a mask on a monster in a movie. And the idea of using a chainsaw as the murder weapon came to Hooper while he was in the hardware section of a business store contemplating how to speed his way through the crowd. So he used that idea. I mean, can you imagine being Tobe Hooper and standing there in a busy store and just, trying to figure out how to wheel your way through all these, packed people? It's just fantastic. So the filming location for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was in Round Rock, Texas. And the small budget and concerns over high-cost equipment rentals meant that the crew filmed 7 days a week, up to 16 hours a day. The environment was humid, and the cast and crew found conditions tough because temperatures used to peak up as high as 110 degrees Fahrenheit. And later on, Gunnar Hansen, who played Leatherface, recalled that it was 95 to 100 degrees every day during filming. They wouldn't wash his costume because they were worried that the laundry might lose it or would be change color. So they didn't have enough money for a second costume, so he wore the mask 12 to 14, 16-hour days, 7 days a week for a month. Now, as I stated before in the beginning of this episode, I did like the graininess and the look and feel of the movie. The movie was mainly shot using an Eclair NPR 16mm camera with a fine-grained, low-speed film that required 4 times more light than modern digital cameras today. Most of the filming took place in the farmhouse, which was filled with furniture constructed from animal bones and latex material used as upholstery to give the appearance of human skin. So if you don't know, being a filmmaker like myself, the Eclair NPR 16mm camera was a big, hot shot deal camera for its time, especially back in the 70s. You did definitely get that grainy look. And if you exposed the film just enough, you got enough light where the film won't be too overexposed, and it's just a perfect look you get for the color and the aspect you want for the shot you're looking for. And that's how they got the look of feel of this movie. Now, I also said that the special effects were simple and limited because of the budget. The on-screen blood was real in some cases, such as the scene in which Leatherface feeds the grandpa. The crew had difficulty getting the stage blood to come out of its tube, so instead, Burns' index finger was cut with a razor, giving the look of blood coming out. Burns' costume was so drenched with stage blood that it was virtually solid by the last day of shooting. And now you can tell that if you watch the film closely, when the blood in the movie is, wet a little bit, and as it goes through, you can tell that over time, it's just so rock hard that you can tell that they never washed anything on set. So it gave it that real look feel to it. Now, the scene in which Leatherface kills Kirk with a chainsaw, the actor William Vail, who plays Kirk, was worried. Because, the chainsaw didn't, was too real, so they wanted a fake one. Now, after Tobe Hooper told Vail to stay still, Gunnar Hansen, who plays Leatherface, brought the running chainsaw to within 3 inches of his face, getting the shot that Tobe Hooper wanted. Now, also, a real hammer was used in the climactic scene at the end, with some takes also featuring a mock-up. However, the actor playing the grandpa was aiming for the floor rather than the victim's head. Still, the shoot was dangerous, with Hooper noting at the wrap party that all the members of the cast had obtained some level of injury. He stated, quote, "Everyone hated me by the time the production was ending, and that it just took years for them to kind of cool off," unquote. So since its 45 plus years of release, this movie has gained a cultural following, became a cult hit, and is one of those movies where you look back on and it's like, wow, this movie inspired so many other slasher films. Some say it was Halloween, but if you look at the release date, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was actually the first horror slasher movie. Some say it was Psycho, and some say it was another movie called Peeping Tom, which was the first kind of horror slasher movie. But this movie, so-called, had its wits about it. It was good in a way. I did like it for what it was. It wasn't as scary as I thought it would be. It's not noted as a horror movie at all. It's just a regular quick slasher movie, which is great. And this movie works on so many levels, and it's just done so well. Like I said, the graininess, the look, the camera shots that were used, the makeup effects. I give credit to these casts and crew members and the director and the producer and even Gunnar Hansen, who played Leatherface, because you're working in 100-degree weather. I've filmed in 100-degree weather, and it's not fun. You have to get people to, cooperate and get things moving really quickly, go over the script, get things done, and just go and shoot for the moon. And once you wrap, that's it. This movie created the slasher genre, and what it did was it took it up a notch, and since then, movies have tried to duplicate or copy the success of the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. Now, a lot of people call it Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but they forget that there's the word "the" in front of it, so it's the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's very different. It's very, crazy how, certain things we look at and we read that we forget of how it's pronounced. But for what Tobe Hooper and Kim Henkel did and how Gunnar Hansen looked as Leatherface was really done well. And with the plot being largely loosely, I want to say loosely is a key word here, by the crimes of murderer Ed Gein, and using skin was different. They really captured the aspect of it, and it definitely did shock people in 1974. But in 1974, the Vietnam War was happening at the time, and graphic images were all over the place on TV and newspapers. So this movie going on since in the 1974 wasn't new at all. Even though the violence was crazy and out of this world, it worked. And sometimes, people say, oh, my favorite movie is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre because it's a slasher horror movie. And then they give you this look like, okay, why? And they sort of like, well, they kill murderous people and they're cannibalistic. And stop. I tell people the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a good movie because of how it changed the slasher genre of filmmaking. If you watch that movie as a fan and then watch it and critique it like I do as a filmmaker, then you'll understand where I'm coming from this aspect of how you watch movies, especially with horror and slasher films. So let me know in the comment section below what you think of the 1974 slasher film, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Do you think that it was really a stepping stone for the slasher movies for its time? And do you think that could things have changed if Tobe Hooper didn't get his way with certain graphic images? And do you see this as a movie that you can't watch because it's just too scary for you, or you just don't want to, be a part of that experience of watching this movie? Let me know in the comment section below. I'm really curious to hear your answers. And be sure you tune into the next episode of the Marchio podcast, where I talk about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. And be sure you click that subscribe button and hit that notification bell for new videos and new podcast episodes on the Marchio Productions YouTube page. And follow Marchio Productions on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And follow me, Anthony, your host, on Instagram and Twitter at misterfilmstock. And follow the Marchio Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. I'll leave a link to all the social media accounts in the description box below. You can check it out and follow along. All right, everyone, that does it for today's episode. I'm your host, Anthony. Thanks for tuning in.